and thank you all for being here today. We're really going to be covering some important topics, especially for our industry. Regarding the new NAR settlement, there are going to be some changes, industry changes, not just in California, nationwide, that all the realtors and people are really talking about it. There is misinformation going on right now regarding what the practice changes are going to be like and what we should be doing. So that's the goal of today's class, is to really focus on your questions, to focus on supporting you as a brokerage and how we're going to be implementing these changes at our company, and ultimately how we can represent buyers and still get a commission. So we do want to be strong in our presentation. We need to be strong on what's proper, not proper, and the whole premise of behind the NAR settlement ultimately falls on the industry, realtor.com, CAR, NAR. I mean, all the industries of being in antitrust and issues regarding the negotiability of the buyer side commission. So before I begin with some of the questions, let's just understand what has been the practice prior to the settlement. The MLS is a tool that we broker communities all throughout the nation elect to join to share our data, to promote our listings, to market it to the public. And the MLS provides an invaluable tool in reaching a wide audience and marketing the photos and the description and the details. For the realtors, it shows us the showing instructions and a lot of sensitive information. But at the practice of everything, the premise falls on the listing itself was offering a commission to, for example, whatever, 2-3% or whatever it is. Those were a compensation to the buyer's broker, in which the listing agent negotiated that with the seller, saying, seller, I work for this percent, and we should also include and must allocate a commission towards the buyer side, and to incentivize and market a MLS to show that, hey, brokers, we have a great listing, it's ready for sale, and we're also supplying you a commission if you introduce it and complete a sale with us. That's the whole premise of what the MLS purpose was designed to do. It's a very functional system. And at the end of the day, the Department of Justice issue with that system is that the commission was never really negotiated by the consumer. So the consumer, which is the buyer buying this property, never had the opportunity to negotiate the rate and the commission and the services with their buyer agent directly. Okay, they were receiving an indirect compensation from either the listing broker cooperative, which is like a broker share, or they're paid by the seller. And this buyer in many different states never was able to negotiate that exact fee. So therefore, it was kind of like allocated or provided, or it was an industry standard practice to just to be hopefully just receiving whatever is advertised on the MLS, even though there's still negotiability uh, during the course of writing an offer. In our region, in San Gabriel Valley, it's very common that buyers kind of already were familiar with negotiating for commission. And in San Gabriel Valley, I noticed, because that's our marketplace, I know there was a lot of buyers who were asking for, hey, can I get a credit? Or, hey, you're getting a significant 3% commission. That's a lot of money. Do you mind, helping me out as a buyer with some of that and crediting it to my closing costs, Mr. Agent? And in practice, some agents would, some agents won't. It's up to your own independent contractor business and relationship, and or you technically do not need to, because that offer of compensation is a service provided for you in compensation from the seller side. So it was kind of something that was kind of negotiated, but now it's to the point where they want all the consumers and to understand that commissions are fully negotiable. It does not matter who pays it. It still should be something that's kind of just what's called allowing the consumer to directly negotiate that rate and terms and services with their own preferred agent. So now that we understand all of this, let's now get into some of the facts and details. Those of you who are just joining me, you are welcome to ask questions anytime. Interrupt me, please, and ask me some of the things on your mind. But I'll go ahead and start sharing my screen, and we're going to go from here on what we should be looking forward to, and I'll give you an example as well. So first of all, I do want to start with the fact sheet of this settlement, and I think you can see it here. So the settlement, basically, we as an industry paid from NAR a lot of money. I think there's a ton of, I don't even remember what it was. Was it, I think it was like something around to the tune of 40 something million dollars. Anyway, so in regards to the settlement of self, the NAR, Realtor Association, paid the plaintiffs and the attorneys, basically the attorneys won the most, a big lump sum of the settlement, and it releases all 1 million NAR members. Okay. It covers all members, which is all of us agents, Coldwell Banker agents. Yes, we are all included as defendants. This should not come back again in another lawsuit. So all the brokers communities that have volume of 2 billion or below are released from the liability nationwide. We, as a brokerage, do have less than $2 billion worth of residential sales. It also just basically provides, as you can see here, that all the main parties and all the big firms, everyone's all included in the settlement release. And what we're trying to do is the rule about offers of compensation on the MLS. This is where we're going to find the biggest industry practice changes. So the cooperative compensation is going to be what's called removed from the MLS. You can still communicate, market, negotiate, text, email, social media. You can still have forms of commissions being advertised to buyer agents off the MLS. Okay. So that's negotiations, phone calls, texts, or flyers. Those are areas that you would be able to supply to buyer brokers and still advertise some compensation that's allocated for the buyer agents. So there'll be many ways in which buyer brokers could be compensated, including through any communication that's not in the MLS, such as like, hey, I see you have, like, this is how it could be done. A buyer agent could say, hey, I showed your property over at 123 Main Street, Alhambra. I love it. My client wants it. By the way, is there any offer of compensation to the buyer broker paid from your firm or from the seller? Can you please let me know? Or you pick up the phone and ask that question. And the listing agent should communicate if or if not any compensation is provided from the seller or from the brokerage. So what types of commission or compensation can you take? There are negotiabilities regarding to these three. It's not limited to these three, but these are the areas where buyer brokers can be compensated. They can get a fixed compensation commission paid directly by their own consumer, their own buyer. So that fixed fee could be a flat dollar amount, like $10,000 if you help me purchase any property and blah 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 blah. A buyer agent can just work for a flat fee or whatnot with their buyer and write that on their own buyer broker agreement, BRBC. Number two, they can get paid from the seller. This is in which the seller is allocating a seller concession. Sometimes there's a new field in the MLS, seller concession, in which they will specify if there's any amount that the seller is going to concede to the buyer, and the buyer can use that to offset any obligation that they owe their own buyer broker. Okay, from the form BRBC. The third option that you can get paid as a buyer's agent is maybe some listing brokers will allocate or share a portion of their own commission. And that would be using form CBC. So if I'm a listing agent and I have a home for sale and I charge the seller, whatever, 4.5% for listing their property, a townhouse in Temple City. Well, if my 4.5% commission is signed by the seller, I can utilize that full total commission of getting it sold and allocate a portion, or for example, 50% of that, and I can share that from broker to broker for any compensation and negotiate and whatnot to a buyer's agent who brings me a successful offer that closes. Okay. It can continue to be negotiated and always be negotiated between the agents and the consumers. So this is something that should be an open dialogue. You have to be sharp and skilled in how you discuss commission because it's a sensitive subject to everyone. And obviously, no buyer agent wants to work for free. So they do want to get compensated somehow, whether it's from the seller, whether it's from the listing broker, or whether it's from their own client. A buyer's agent should be wanting some sort of compensation for the services rendered. So what does this do? It does have some implications for home buyers and sellers. It preserves the choices that consumers have regarding the services that they want and the compensation. So amount. So for example, let's say a seller says, look, I just I don't want you to let's say a seller and a listing broker are having a negotiation on commission. The seller can say, look, I'll show my own open houses. I'm a for sale by owner. Originally, you found me. And ultimately, I know about my property. I don't need you to do open houses. I don't need you to review and provide so much services, Mr. Listing Broker. Can you give me a limited brokerage agreement in which maybe some brokers out there will just do what's called either a limited service for MLS only, and they have no involvement in negotiations. They simply just post it in the MLS with photos and a description with a price, blah, 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 showing instructions. And they say, look, contact the seller directly. This is a limited service agency, and I am not involved as a listing broker. I'm not providing a fiduciary or representing the seller. I'm a limited service listing broker. Or maybe it says, yeah, listing broker, I just need you to put it in the MLS and help me review and prepare all the forms and negotiations of contracts. So can you take a reduced commission, Mr. Listing Broker? And I could still be having a fiduciary at a discounted rate with my seller client. Yes. And maybe my seller says, yeah, you don't need to do any open houses. You don't need to do any negotiations or anything. Just give me the forms and let me, I'll help you with the, filling this out. That's possible. It allows a seller to choose limited services or a full services of seller side duties. For the buy side, same thing. A buyer can have full service buyer agent who always does everything, shows the property, schedules appointments, provides a network of relationships or network of professionals like attorneys or CPAs. It could be home inspectors and title reps and all this stuff. So a full service agent should be doing something like a CMA of the property, a market analysis, neighborhood information, and maybe accompanying them to consultations with the electrician or to the city clerk office to find out and pull permits. That's a full service buyer broker. But then some buyers saying, oh, I'm sophisticated. This is my 12th home I purchased in my life. I don't need so much services from you, buyer agent. Can I negotiate that you simply just write the offer, help me negotiate stuff with the seller agent, and I'll handle everything else by myself? I'll run my own due diligence. I just need you to schedule things and prepare things on the forms and my requests. So that buyer broker can choose to do some sort of limited or discounted rate with their client because they don't have to do so much. That's something that's up to you as an independent contractor. Obviously, we want to do a full service for our clients. We want to advocate for the importance of the role of a realtor and all of the AVID and the disclosures and the due diligence that we do on behalf of our clients. So I hope you're still advocating for your full commission, but at the same time, there are ways that, like again, a buyer has the right to negotiate and select which realtor and what services they would like to be working and getting with their agent of choice. So that negotiability should be allowed. There should be discussions, conversations, explanation, education to the client. Absolutely. Those are extra steps that you as a buyer's agent should be formulating how you're going to be presenting your value proposition. So, what's the new rules? Well, for first, before let me say, so the offers of compensation to buyer brokers should not be communicated via the MLS. That includes private remarks. That includes, well, the BAC field will be removed, so there's not going to be any commission percent posted on there. That also includes your supplements. You can't advertise it there. But you can always say, buyer agents, please email me if you're interested or you want to write an offer, please email me for commissions and any requests you have. I can share with you with you could prepare a simple flyer that has your commission posted on there. That will be allowed if you directly email it to them or put it in for example, a WeChat text group or a realtor forum, off any marketing like your social media, Instagram or Facebook. Those are, as long as you follow the DRE guidelines, you may communicate to buyer agents in your network, social media. Okay. So now that we've covered that, so seller may communicate legally in the MLS concessions in the price. So a seller can say, I would like to help a buyer with their closing costs to incentivize and promote my listing and make sure they come visit my property. And I want the buyer to know upfront that if they purchase my property, the seller is willing to give to the buyer either a flat fee or a percentage amount of the price of the sales price. Either of those may be communicated inside the MLS. Buyer, we can give you 2% seller concessions to help you with your closing costs. Okay. And in that instance, the buyer can have the right to use that 2% concession from the seller any form or manner, which way they like in their closing costs. Your closing costs for a buyer include your lender fees, title, if you have a lender, your escrow fees, and or if you have a buyer broker agreement signed with the buyer and their buyer brokerage, whatever fee that is. Any amount provided from seller concessions, it can be used by the buyer however they like, whichever way they wanted to. The buyer agent should hopefully be having a strong enough commission signed with the buyer, and it could show up on the buyer's closing costs as a commission. Let's say my rate with my buyer is 2.5% for representation, full. If the buyer receives 2% as a concession, then the buyer would have to supply additional 0.5% because the 2% does not fully complete the buyer brokerage agreement. So the buyer would have additional closing costs of 0.5%. if that's what our agreement stipulated in the contract. Okay. Now, if my buyer broker agreement only specified 1%, okay, great. Me as a buyer broker would receive 1% commission from the buyer, and they would receive 2% total from the seller as a seller concession. So the additional 1% the buyer would use to offset, it fully pays the buyer broker agreement, and the additional 1% could be used towards the lender, title, and escrow fees that they have. Okay. So that's how it's explained in negotiations of where seller concessions and the purpose. So now that we understand that part, written agreements, they are always been long encouraged from the beginning of time that you should have a written agreement with your clients. The settlement provides that MLS participants working with buyers must enter into written agreements with your buyers. Effective mid-July 2024, it's already in practice now pretty soon, in which if you're going to show a property in the MLS, you're declaring to the other party and to the seller and the listing broker that you have a signed written agreement with your buyer. That's a declaration. They are not necessarily policing or going to verify, or you have to send it over to the buyer, to the listing broker to get a showing. But some listing brokers might take this and they may ask for a affirmation from you that you have a signed written agreement for your buyer. Okay. It's up to the listing broker who do they don't let in. Now, it's if you have an off-market listing, okay, then that's not necessarily required then. This is only for listings that are in the MLS. Okay. What's an example of an off-market listing? Something I have on LoopNet, something I have on CoStar, something that I have what's called an off-market exclusion and form signed for the listing, stuff like that. Those are all areas of where I can still advertise a home for sale. So now that we understand that part, after this new rule goes into effect, which the MLS, our CRMLS will begin making changes August 13th. Okay. A little bit like 5 days or a week before the last deadline. So we're going to take it effects August 13th week, and you'll start seeing the industry BAC field removed. Okay. So for the people who are acting for buyers, you have to have a written agreement. You should describe and explain how consumers, how much value services you're providing, and for how much fee. Okay. What is your services include, and what is that cost? So that is the ultimate fact sheet of what the industry changes are. They paid $418 million over 4 years from NAR, and they pay it over time. And all of a sudden, and I noticed that there's a lot of more campaigns going on YouTube. Realtor.com and NAR are putting all sorts of commercials and ads trying to teach the value of what the buyer's agents and what agents, realtors do for their clients. So there is a campaign that they're paying a lot of money to try to improve the perception of realtors, improve and explain the misconceptions of what this is. Because Jing asked me a very great question earlier this week. And Jing, she asked me, what are the changes going on? My seller's reading the news and the seller says, oh, I don't have to pay a buyer's agent commission anymore. Is that true? Awesome. Now I want to sell my property. Not now. I want to sell it, post August and wait for the changes so I don't have to pay a commission. Okay. And when I'm reading that statement, I can see how that's how sellers can read through this and say, well, that's true. Technically speaking, sellers do not have to advertise and will not be able to advertise a commission to the buyer side. So that's removed from the MLS, like I said. However, the seller still has the option to include a seller concession. It's already in the MLS. So that's they can elect to. But as a listing broker, when I'm presenting to the seller who has misinformation, I have to clarify and say, while what you're saying is technically true, you are not obligated to pay a buyer's broker commission. Everything is negotiated once we get this marketed and everything get going. But it also allows you to provide a seller's concession. And at the end of the day, Mr. or Mrs. Seller, you can write zero seller concessions, zero commission to a buyer's broker. I will not pay a dime to any buyer broker commission request at all. And I want you, listing broker, to work with that. Okay. I will only willing to pay you, listing broker, whatever that we discuss on our listing agreement commission field, not a penny more. Let's put a 2.5%, get my property sold. Here's my asking price. Here's my listing beginning date and ending date. Get it done. No, and I want to see you right. No commission from seller to buyer's agent, whatever, blah, blah, blah. And let's just say the seller's very particular and savvy and is insistent on that request. So I can do that. I can advertise zero seller concessions, no commissions being offered whenever the buyer agent asks me and call me. Nope, not a dime from anyone, nothing. Okay. Now, what happens if that's the case? So this seller is getting what they want. They're not paying anything. Me as my listing broker fee, I had that written in my listing contract and I'm protected, but I have to work harder selling this property to a buyer agent and a buyer unless that property sells itself. Okay, meaning it's very attractive and it's priced very attractively, for example. So the because of that uh demand from my seller and that I want to honor that request after educating them and they still insist to stay at zero seller concession, zero commission, that's fine. Take the listing. Let's proceed. Let's work it. Let's get it. And I'll communicate all of this to the buyer's agent. No commission being offered by the seller. Any offer that you have, you must negotiate and have your own buy client pay for your fee from your buyer side. Okay. And so I'll just have to communicate that anytime they call me and request or clarify or ask, I'll have to just communicate that. I'll write it in my MLS and um just go on to sell from there. Okay. What that does do to the seller is it makes the property less marketable. Because there's no advertised seller concession and because maybe this listing has 7 other listings nearby active, and if 6 of those listings are giving a concession upfront, maybe some buyers would like to reduce or limit the amount of closing costs that they will have uh, to be obligated to if they were to purchase that property. So if I'm a buyer and I'm looking at 7 properties right here in San Gabriel, 6 of them are offering 2% seller concessions, and this one listing broker is offering 0. That's going to be something that's in my decision-making process as a buyer. Well, if I buy this one at this price, I have to pay I have to add another $20,000 for my buyer agent commission. If the property is, for example, $1 million, that's 2%. So I got to add $20,000 to my closing costs. So how about this? I still like that property. Let me go ahead and reduce my offer price by 20,000. So therefore, if I do get this property, my $20,000 is already being saved by the price, and I'll just allocate that 20,000 savings to pay for my broker fee as my own agent that I gave them 2%. So if that's my mindset as a buyer, that's how I could treat it in my thinking process of deciding between A, B, and C listings. Now, I will also factor, oh, great, number B and C listings, they're offering me 2.5% seller concessions. Awesome. I like that. it's kind of comparable. It has 4 bedrooms. It has 3 baths like I needed, just like A. And maybe I need to work on it a little bit, but since they're giving me 2.5%, great. That reduces my obligation to my buyer's broker commission. I can write an offer over asking. I want to compete for this one. I'll give 1,025,000 for this one because I know they're going to give me 2.5% back. So therefore, that's kind of relative to the other one, but I kind of like this one better because now I have less out of pocket. I don't have so much savings, especially if I was a FHA buyer, having a $25,000 commission to my buyer's agent. That's hard for me to save even 3.5% down. How am I going to save $20,000 extra to pay closing costs? You can't finance that. Remember, guys, you got to pay it out of, it has to be something that's paid out at closing of escrow. So that allows me to write a bigger offer, stronger offer, knowing that there's something being conceded from the seller and I'm competing against others. Does that make sense? Okay. So that's one of the things I wanted to show you regarding the NAR fact sheet. I'm going to give this link over to all of you. This is the smart zone for the new business practices. So for all of you in my Zoom right now, I'm going to put this in the chat box. You can save this link. And in this link, this is where you, after you log into the MLS, you will be able to, just read up on all of the resources from CAR regarding the forms, and I like the town halls. These are legal attorney presentations in which they are sharing their knowledge and industry practices. So for example, July 10th, next week, tomorrow, July 11th, July 12th, you could register right here, and they're going to talk about all the industry changes, conversations, questions that you have, and you can ask the car attorney, hey, is a seller concession exactly the same thing as a buyer commission? And they'll answer your questions directly. You just write it in the chat box. Okay. You're going to be in with like 100 people, 100 agents and brokers, all in California, and opportunity for you to cover the materials that they're really trying to push hard for us to understand. Now, I mentioned a broker commission is very different from a seller concession. Okay. These are two separate things. A commission to a buyer's agent is simply that. It's compensation for your services of a successful closing. The seller concessions, like I explained to you, is all inclusive of buyer's recurring, non-recurring closing costs, which is inclusive of that, a buyer's closing costs, like I said, escrow fees, title fees, lender fees, closing costs that they might have, plus the commissions if they have a signed buyer broker BRBC form. That's an additional closing cost. That is the definition of the seller concessions, in which, if allocated from the seller, it must be used by the buyer towards those areas that I described. All right. So now that we understand that, I kind of want to get into this page right here. It's the NAR fact sheet. Okay. So we kind of covered some of these areas. I'm going to give you this link as well, in case you are curious about learning about it. And I want to go over the practice changes. Okay. So these are the exact changes to the MLSs. Prohibit any requirement of offers of compensation, BAC, removed. Cooperation for MLS participation is now redefined, and it eliminates and prohibits MLS subscribers and participants from making any offers of compensation. Um, it also takes it off of the syndicated websites, okay, like Zillow, Redfin, and whatnot. Um, it takes away the ability for agents to filter listings by compensation. Okay, I usually have that field in my um, template, so I do look at that, and it does require MLS participants working with the buyer to enter into written agreement. So that is your key area. If you're a buyer agent and you want to show properties and represent a buyer, you can clearly just say, look, the law requires me for you have a written agreement signed. That's why I'm presenting this BRBC form to you, buyer. But look, it only specifies the 3 properties that we're looking at today that I scheduled an appointment for you. These 3 properties are the only protections, written agreements that I have with you. And I'm not, you're not obligated to me for other properties. If that's something that I want to do, which is called weekend by weekend, I can do this with my buyer agent, my buyer. Okay. So that is going to take effect. August 17th is the revised date. August 13th is when CRMLS is going to do it. Now, the consumer gets to choose whether to use a real estate professional or not. Some research confirms that some people find great value in services of a buyer broker. And then there's a sophisticated investor who knows how to do this without a buyer broker. Potentially, some buyers will negotiate directly with the listing broker and may elect to choose to have no representation. That is possible for a buyer to do at their own risk and discretion. And obviously, this listing broker may or may not double end it. They may help negotiate, facilitate the transaction in forms. Who knows how the listing brokers are going to work? But I'm encouraging you to be having that conversation and to understand that it's not a requirement for a buyer to have representation. Jing asked a nice question. Does that mean that there would be no more dual agents? Incorrect. There probably will lead to more dual agency now that this has happened. But that's speculation. I can't tell you affirmatively. So, what does that lead to, more or less dual agency? It's hard to say, okay, because dual agency is something that occurs when there's a buyer seeking and loves a property. They're very interested, and in the buyer's kind of mythical mindset of whatever they've done, some buyers believe that they may get a better opportunity, a better chances of winning and getting their offer accepted, and or they believe that negotiating directly with the listing agent may be their best chances to get acceptance and success. That's up to that buyer and their own trained thought processes. Whether this buyer elects representation from the listing broker, that conversation, I don't know how that's going to go. A very unethical listing broker may try to get them to work with me. I'm the listing agent. You want what you want? I know you want it. I'm your key gateway to get that property. And if you want it, I need to represent you. Here's the value that I provide, Mr. Buyer. I I would like a buyer broker agreement, because as you can see in this MLS listing, this is not offering any seller concessions. Maybe it is. I don't know. Let's just say it's 1%, okay? Just for the peace of mind. Let's say this seller is offering 1% seller incentives Okay. Not a penny more, not a penny less. There's no commission being offered from the seller to the buyer's side, but I would love to represent you. Here's what I could do for you, buyer. I will make sure that you get a seller incentive of 1%, like we advertised. My normally in off most buyer agents are asking for something like 2% or 3% for their representation of you. Because you came to me, buyer, I'll work for that 1%. Okay. You can utilize that seller incentive to offset my fee as your representative. And let's go ahead and write it up, the offer. You tell me what it is, and then the seller will allocate 1% to you and your closing costs. And by you signing my BRBC form, this is your obligation to me as 1%. It's kind of like a wash. And sure, I would love to represent you. I'll be your agent, and let's get this property, let's get it going. Some buyers might agree to that. Okay. So does that lead to an opportunity for dual agency for this listing broker? It does. This listing broker just basically got that seller incentive and asked that buyer broker to use it to offset my commission. But I'm not going to charge you any more because some buyer brokers are going to ask for 2% and 3% or 5%. I saw someone recently sent us an offer with the 5% buyer broker agreement obligation. And that agent somehow got it signed by their buyer. Okay. So whatever the rate the buyer agent charges their own buyer, that's not anything to do with me. That's on their closing costs. I don't care. If their offer is the offer, my seller gets that price. At the end of the day, who am I to judge if this agent earns more than me? Just like an attorney or a doctor. If I'm a doctor and I specialize in bones and orthopedic, and I earn $2,000 for this procedure service, but this same orthopedic down the street charges 10,000 for that orthopedic procedure. Who am I to care if they get a client to pay them that 10,000 for that service, for that procedure? Every professional should have the right to choose their own rate and services and fees, correct? So good for that doctor for getting 10,000 for that same procedure. And if I earn 2% and the other guy's earning 5%, so be it. Okay. That's what it is. That's what they negotiated. Does that mean buyers won't have to use a buyer broker to purchase a property? Again, from NAR, they say the consumer gets to choose whether or not they wish to use the services of a buyer broker. They do believe it's imperative and helpful, and buyer brokers should articulate what services and value you provide. But technically speaking, in that same hypothetical situation of 1% being offered to the buyer's incentive, seller concession, let's go ahead and say the buyer says, listing broker, I do rely on the property. Thank you for explaining to me that you would help me represent me for that 1%. But I'm really razor thin margins on my ratios and my income and my down payment. I need that full 1% for my closing costs. I'm sorry. I would love to work with you as my agent, but how about this? You know what? I simply I don't need you to be my buyer agent. Just write the offer for me, please. I'll pay you $500 flat fee to write the offer as we discussed. That I verbally told you I'll give you 900,000. I wanted to close in 30 days. I'm going to finance 80% and just write it up as normal, was proper or reasonable, 50-50 for escrow. You could choose all the services. I'll give you a flat fee, $500. Just write it up for me, no representation, and I need that 1% to pay for my closing costs because I absolutely need it for my ratios. And that in that instance, the listing broker has the choice to write that offer and represent that service or decline it or to negotiate it or to explain further that $500 is not enough for all the things that I got to do for you, buyer broker. $500 is barely covering the paper that I print and 2 hours of my time writing it up and delivering it and doing all the stuff for you. I got to spend a minimum of 12 hours with you, buyer. I got to go to the property. I got to meet the appraiser. You have an appraiser that you have to order, right? You have a loan. I got to go meet that appraiser that you're gonna have to send me for, and your $500 doesn't cover that. I need at least 5,000, and I can get it done. Maybe that works. Maybe the buyer accepts that. I don't know. Okay. So you got to calculate and be sharp in your time involved if you're going to represent or not represent a client. Does that mean buyer brokers have to work for free? No, you don't work for free. Absolutely not. You need to have an agreement and work with clients that are willing to value your services. It could be a flat fee, like $500. Like I said, it could be 5,000 flat, 10,000, 20 flat, or percentage like 1, 2, 3%, 2.5%, 2.25%, whatever that is. But the buyer brokers would continue to take or be able to take it from the listing broker's compensation, from the seller concessions, from a fixed fee paid from the consumer. All of this is going to be needed to be negotiated August 13th and beyond. How will buyer brokers get paid now? Through the escrow. Okay. So again, it's going to be still paid by someone. Either the seller, the listing broker will share their commission, or the buyer. Let's see if there's any more questions. Jing says, does that mean that we no more does the $500 paid upon close of escrow or upon submitting the offer to the seller? That depends on your buyer broker contract. And just remember, any form of compensation received or earned from an agent must be paid to the brokerage, not to the agent directly. That it would be a violation of your DRE license. So if you were, for example, going to charge $500 to your client just to write the offer, I would say it's based on the service of writing the offer is what you stipulate. It does not necessarily mean acceptance of that offer either. So I would probably, in my opinion, the hours that you spent or the whatever to write the offer, to call the agent, to negotiate it, to show the property, that to me could potentially be $500 earned at the time of completion and submission of the offer. Ask the client to pay a check to Pickle Baker Dynasty, $500, and your services have been rendered. And you can stipulate on your buyer broker agreement upon acceptance of an offer, that flat fee of $500 now becomes whatever. It could be up to 2%. Okay. And that's my commission rate. And that $500 offset, that $500 will be offset off of that 2%. So now it's going to be just your remaining amount will be 2% minus the $500. Okay. That's something potentially you could do. I'm not telling you how to operate or run your business or how to charge. Now, can you charge for limited services as a buyer agent? Absolutely. Let's say the buyer says, "Hey, Kelvin, look, I'm a shopper. I don't have no loyalty to any agents. The agent that finds me the right deal will get my business." And I said, "Fair enough. You want me to introduce properties to you?" "No, Kelvin, I want you to yes, I want you to introduce properties, but I also want you to schedule the showings for me. I want you to be able to find out information like negotiability, price, and details. And I'm not signing any buyer broker agreement." Okay. Then will this buyer agent technically be in violation? Yes. Because if you have no buyer broker agreement, you really shouldn't be scheduling showings. Okay. So it puts you at risk. If they do sign the BRBC form with you, but it's specifically for those properties that you show this weekend, okay, great. You're protected for whatever amount that's on there. Okay. So that that's it's going to be very confusing, but yet it is going to have some learning curves, and you're going to start seeing some industry changes. Yes. Um so let me continue and finish off this page. I'm going to show you the MLS right now. So this is a good question right here. Can I rely on an offer of compensation that was published prior to the change in CRMLS? And if the sales contract is executed before the MLS change, the buyer broker is reliably going to be able to get whatever is advertised on the MLS prior to the change. Take a snapshot, save that photo or printout. But I also still, from now till August 13th, every offer you write representing a buyer include Form CBC just to verify, insure, and have it on your hands and file to protect your whatever advertised commission. Don't just rely on a printout. Submit your CBC form from this next month. But if a sales contract is not executed before the date of the changes of August 13th, then the offer on the MLS will no longer be valid. So if you are a buyer agent and you showed them a property August 10th, they love it. It used to be advertising 2%. Now it's not on there in the field any longer. You can call the agent August 15th, write the offer. Hey, by the way, I noticed it was 2% before. Is it still being 2% as a CBC form? Or is the seller going to pay that and I should submit form SPBB, seller payment to buyer's broker, as a seller, or is it going to be as a seller incentive? Which of the three forms do you want me to prepare with my offer? There's three forms of compensation. CBC means the listing broker is going to share X amount of commission from the listing broker's listing contract. SPBB is a form where the seller pays buyer's broker directly in escrow for the whatever rate that you in terms that you put on their SPBB form. The third way is BRBC, where it's paid by the buyer in their closing costs. Okay, so know those three forms. BRBC is what buyer pays. SPBB is where the seller pays. CBC, listing broker pays it. Let's show you what those facts look like. I think I don't want to confuse you, so let's go ahead and take a look. So I'm gonna go to my transaction center. I need to open up zip forms. I'm gonna do my screen share. Open up my new zip forms. And I'll show you what I'm talking about. All right, so now I'm in my zip forms. Hopefully you guys can follow along with me and see my transactions. And let's go ahead and I'm going to open up 123 test file. Now in this file, you're going to see a couple of different things that I was talking to you about. Let's bring up the BRBC. Let's go ahead and bring out the SPBB. Let's go ahead and bring out the CBC. Let's go ahead and bring out the listing agreement. Let's go ahead and bring out the purchase agreement while we're at it, because I have a lot to show you. Okay. All right. Now, starting with the listing agreement, okay? Exclusive. Inside the listing contract, you notice that June revisions made some changes to it, okay? And hopefully you guys see the listing contract right now in front of you. Do you or do you not see this? You guys see my zip forms contracts, right?
Yes.
All right, thank you. Awesome, Gene. So use this with every residential listing agreement. A disclosure and modification to listing agreement is now automatically attached. Okay. That offering compensation to buyer brokers representing buyers through the MLS. you authorize me to use the MLS to offer commission, and the NAR has entered a settlement. We need to modify this listing agreement. Once this changes are started August 13th, we need to redo our listing terms or modifications. And that once that occurs, we agree to notify you, seller. Once the MLS no longer able to offer buyer broker compensation field, broker also agrees to notify seller of the method and means it will use to offer compensation to buyer's broker when that event occurs. I will use reasonable efforts consistent with NAR to market your property, to offer compensation to buyer brokers, like we discussed, let's say 2%. That seller agrees the listing agreement authorizing broker to cooperate with and compensate brokers participating through the MLS will no longer be in effect as of the date of MLS. Blah, 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 blah. All of the terms of the listing agreement remain in full force and effect, except as modified herein. Okay. Now, I have a listing agreement at 12345 Main Street, Arcadia. Let's just say it began tomorrow, up until the end of the year. Great. Okay. And we put it for $1 million. Okay. Oh, that's 10 million. I'm gonna take out a zero. And my rate would have been, let's just, for example, originally.
Alvin, yeah,
Yes.
I have a question regarding the listing term. So normally what we need to put it on? The
What are
B,
say that again?
second, the paragraph 2 and on the B item.
Okay.
Yeah, normally what we need to put on that.
Any specific terms that you have agreement with the seller. For example, I have seen agents put something like this. And let's just say my commission was 5% originally. And I always specify this field of like 60 or 90 days. Okay. And I usually advertise, for example, half of that, 2.5% out. Okay. So this is in which I'm having a 5% listing agreement. I'm going to CBC 2.5% out from now to the end of August 13th. I have 2.5% advertised to go out, and we're going to cooperate. And I, for example, could write a term like this. Okay. If you choose to write this term in, you now have what's called on the MLS, something called dual variable rate of commission. That answer should be yes. You have a dual variable rate. Okay. Most of the times, agents always just say dual variable rate and they put no, 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 and they don't know what it means. This is an instance of a variable rate. Now, I have used this specifically for 1720 Wilson Arcadia I sold 2 years ago. I wrote, if final sales price I used a variable, what's called rate, and I wrote something like this.
Great, thank you.
Okay. And I even gave myself a bonus. If you really want to see what I wrote on my listing agreement, I'll show it to you. Anyway, I wrote, if I sold it over 1 point, and I gave myself a threshold of 20,000 above asking. If sold above 1,020,000, I actually wrote the commission to be 5.2%. Okay, it was 0.2 additional. So, and I said, and I took 0.2 below. Okay, so now that I covered the listing agreement, that is really what I mean. There's a lot of areas you could put on there. Sometimes listing terms could be to what's called a duty to the seller. Seller listing terms. Let me go ahead and show you another example. Okay. I need to know a copy of their lease agreement of the solar. Okay. Or of their HOA CCNRs, and I want to know the restrictions and the rules of for pets and for storage or parking. Whatever it is that I think is details of the specific property or arrangements that I have with the seller, like a listing broker agrees to pay for staging. I can put it in here. Okay. So all of that is, want to say hi to everybody, Brady? Okay, my son wants to say hi to you guys.
Hi.
Hello. He wants to learn real estate with us together.
That's good.
So, at the end of the day, I don't know what arrangements you're putting on here, but you could write like who pays staging, or maybe you suggest 50-50. Okay. You could put in stuff like I don't know. Anyway, you let me know if you have specific instances. Okay. Now you notice the rest of this has not changed too dramatically. Any questions on the listing?
Yeah, I have one area like I think the MLS. I cannot recall. If you don't mind, can you scroll up, Calvin? Scroll up like on the page 3, I think. Okay, let me see.
This is page 2 right here.
Okay, page 2. Oh, this one, yeah, this one here, the C. So we should put this C.
Yeah,
right?
all of us are all in CRMLS. And when I
Mhm.
take a commercial, I actually put it on, I put CoStar.
Oh, I
So this is
see.
what I do
Okay,
if it's a commercial building.
I see.
Okay.
Yeah,
Any other questions before I move on to the next?
yeah, please.
All right. This is where I have the instructions. Hey, I'm not ready to do it this week. Let's put it on. And I would say, oh, let's put it on next week, July 17th. Okay, this is allows me to market it and put it today. I could put it as coming soon up until next week, July 17th. That's the start showing date. Okay.
So, okay, by the way, you're talking about the, how to say that, the coming soon. So once everybody signed, although the day is 17, and then I have to put it on within 24 or 48 hours, or I can wait like maybe
You have
until,
you have 2 days, 48 hours from the date of the listing agreement, beginning date, which is right here, or from the last signature of the sellers, whichever is later.
I see, got you.
Okay.
Yeah.
And if I were to go ahead and put this field in here of July 17th, I would add the form SELM that allows me to start showing 7/17, and I want to do coming soon from today till to that date.
17. So what about after, if anything changed, so which form we need to use? Right now we put 17, right? So maybe the property not complete at that time, so
So then you use modification of terms. If you were saying, oh, we're still not ready, the photography is not coming till the 20th, then you modify terms, modify 7 RLA 7D to be modified to July 20th.
I know. So the modified term, is it any document we need to use, or just because the document of this authorization already signed for all the parties?
Yeah,
So
this is a valid contract once executed. So to modify a legal instrument, a document, you would modify with using MOT. Form MOT.
MOT. Okay, I
Okay.
see. Got you. Okay. Yeah.
Modification of terms.
Yeah.
All right, now that we're done with the listing contract, let me show you the purchase contract real quick, and then I just want to show you what happens on the various forms and what end today. Okay. So
Uh-huh.
just wanted to point you that the purchase agreement does stipulate SPBB as an optional click field. I want you agents to always check to see and verify whenever you're looking at an offer. So if you're looking at an offer here from this is the client, Sell It Fast Sally and Big Bucks Bob. So look at this is an example, right? Notice on here at the very end, agents are often going to miss this, that a buyer is writing this offer, right?
Yeah.
They're going to sign it here, okay? And
What is this from?
hold it.
No, it is it.
Sorry, guys. Okay, so there is an area here called G3 on page 2 of your RPA. Okay.
Uh-huh.
What is SPBB is also described in paragraph 18A of the RPA. Now,
Uh-huh.
the first instance that I want you to be looking at, if they check this box, they are going to attach this form that says seller is going to pay the obligation of a buyer to compensate the buyer's broker under a separate agreement, and that agreement is going to be attached SPBB. Seller's broker's offer, if any, to compensate buyer's broker is unaffected unless otherwise agreed. Okay, so if you read through this, you will see that then we brings us, what is SPBB? I've never seen that before. Okay, so great. I want to pull it up. It's right here. Let me add this form in and I show it to you. They're going to give you an RPA and then it's going to have attached SPBB where buyer already entered a written agreement, BRBC, and buyer has an obligation to pay certain fee to that buyer agent. And the buyer's asking seller to pay for the buyer's broker, all or a portion of the balance due the buyer's broker. And that buyer RPA may ask for something like 2% of the sales price. Or they might ask if you're sharing it from your commission as a 5% listing or 4% listing, then they would ask from it here instead. Okay. And if you don't have that, you only have a 2%, 2.5% listing with your seller, then they should get it from the seller directly. Okay. So
Yeah.
this buyer brokers, let's just say they have 2.5% signed with their buyer. How much do they want from the seller? Look, seller, you're advertising a seller incentive of 2%. Okay, I'll just take that 2% here. Okay. Seller payment to buyer's broker shall not be greater than the amount in paragraph 1. Okay. Seller agrees to pay buyer's broker 2% of the purchase price or a flat fee, and whichever it cannot be greater than the number 1. Okay. And then they sign it and fill it out. This is a completed SPBB. They're
Mhm.
disclosing that they're earning 2.5. The seller's obligation is 2%. And this is the disclosure. Seller's payment to buyer's broker shall not be greater than the amount in paragraph 1. That's 2%. Or if checked this. Now, my question to you, or my advice to you, since this is now what's called a field that they may include on that RPA, like I showed to you, it's now what's called a term that's negotiable. And just like the Department of Justice wants us to negotiate, we can still negotiate these terms. You do not have to just simply say yes. So if they attach this, you can say, okay, seller's counter offer or multiple counter offer, form SPPB if provided, seller's obligation to buyer's broker shall only be 1.5%. And you can negotiate it down. Okay. It's possible to negotiate that depending on their offer or the terms of their offer. The buyer
Sure.
broker is going to sign their own buyer broker form. And remember I said that buyer had 2.5%? That 2.5% would be a buyer broker like Big Bucks Bob and Millionaire Matthew. If I'm representing these buyers, I would be asking them for Kelvin Chang. Actually, it's supposed to be Coldwell Banker Dynasty right here. Okay. Beginning, let's just say July 9th and ending, I'll just say 60 days. Okay. And I could specify the list of properties, and I just write address 1, address 2, and addee 3. I want 2.5%. That's my fee. I'm gonna give them exclusive representation, and for the next 60 days or whatever. And if third-party receipts exceed buyer's obligation, the excess amount shall be paid to broker. I love that. Don't check any box here. Okay, because I potentially might introduce them to a Lennar home or a KB home or whatever, and they might be offering a bonus incentive of 5% realtor commission. They do that every once in a while. They have a few remaining left, and they might offer you 5%. This buyer BRBC form allows me to collect the full 5% or 4.5% of whatever they're offering. And I do not need to share it with someone else or the buyer. Okay. Now, other than that, this is all just description and language and definitions. You can include any other terms. Okay. And so this is up to you. You can write in here limited services, described as showings only, or scheduling appointments. And maybe if you're discounting, agent is not providing neighborhoods CMA. I don't know. You could limit your services. Okay. Or let's just say I had a situation in which my buyer is very sharp and sophisticated. He says, I will go all open houses on my own and schedule them. Okay. Buyer, the limited services. In which agent does not need to schedule showings or viewings. Buyer will visit open houses. I don't know. Even though that's a risky activity, if you allow your buyer to do this, you're putting yourself in a bad situation. Even though you're going, oh yeah, but then they're looking all the way in Palmdale, and I don't want to drive there, so that's your choice. But if you fail to accompany your client to the open house, you allow opportunities for the listing agent to steal your client, even if you have this form signed. So let's just say you introduce Palmdale property 1, 2, and 3, and they go on Saturday to view it. Listing broker says, well, you have a signed BRBC form. Okay, I have to respect it. But the buyer says, I really want this property. Can you write the offer and help me get it signed by tonight? You can represent me. Okay. I know my agent is not gonna enforce this agreement. And then they write the offer, sign it, they're in escrow, you're left out of the deal. You find out they closed 30 days later. What is your options? Well, Kelvin, I have a signed agreement. You told me to get a signed contract. I have it here. Look, I introduced it to them. They went to the property. I have this thing that they're gonna view it directly. I don't need to do any schedulings. they closed escrow on property address 1. I specified it on here. It's protected, right? And I'm gonna say, yeah, it's protected. Okay, you introduced it. Who wrote the offer? Them. Who showed it to them? Them. What did you do then? I sent it to them in the MLS. I have evidence. They opened my email. I gave them a flyer and I told them it was open house on Saturday. Here's my text. Okay, you have 3 elements of procuring cause. Do you know that the greatest strength of procuring cause is who writes the offer? They also have 3 elements of procuring cause. They showed the property. They didn't introduce, they wrote the offer, the strongest one, and they negotiated some counter offers, I think. Okay. They have several elements of procuring cause. You guys are equal in procuring cause numbers. I can't tell you who's going to win if this goes to court. Then I'm going to say, Kelvin, but I have 2.5%. Don't you want to get that commission? I'm like, yeah, I do. So what are we going to do? And I'm going to say, well, you have what's called a gray area in which you have a choice. And if you want to try to get someone to interpret this, we have several choices. Number 1, reach out to your buyer. Hey, buyer, look at our agreement. You closed escrow. You owe me 2.5%, buyer. My company's asking for commission. 2.5%. Send them an invoice. Okay. How many of you think out of 10 buyers, how many out of those 10 is going to volunteer 2.5% to you? 0. Nobody's going to volunteer that money. They're going to say, no, I actually worked with this agent. I didn't know what I signed. You didn't explain it to me. I just signed it because I needed to get that access, but you told me to go straight to the open house, and then he told me I need to work with him, and I love the property. Kelvin, I'm sorry. And then they're gonna I'm sorry that I have no more money. I spent it all on the house. Okay, who's gonna volunteer that money? 0. So then what's your next choice? Small claims. Hire an attorney. Okay, and you can put a lien on the property. If you win, prevail. But there's still a risk and there's still a cost to get that money. So you have to put a retainer like 5,000, 10,000 to an attorney to go chase maybe 2.5%. Okay. It might be worthwhile if it's a $5 million home, but if it's a $40,000 or $100,000 Lancaster home, it might not be worthwhile. That's only $2,500 if it's 100,000. So then there's a question of, is it worthwhile to pursue a 7,000 or 10,000 retainer to chase 10,000 at the risk of not winning? And I don't have the answer for you. So that's where if you let your clients go unaccompanied, you allow risks. Okay. Now, the last form that we didn't discuss yet is the cooperating broker compensation, which is familiar. Okay. We've seen all the other forms, and this is just either from now till August 13th, I'm asking you to confirm or modify. So if they're advertising 2% and you're happy with that, I'm confirming 2%. If they only advertise 1% and I want 2%, then I'll put that here. Okay. Do you have any questions? So what does it look like in the landscape of the MLS? All right, let's go into the landscape of the MLS, and I'll start sharing a few things, and then we'll end today. All right, I'm logging in my MLS. Let me go to my Zoom and start sharing that screen. And you'll notice that I'll log into the MLS and see what's going on in the I'll do San Gabriel Valley. That's a nice little workshop. Let's see all the residential homes active for sale. I'll just do single families and I'll map out properties in All right, so let's just look in our general vicinity of San Gabriel Valley, and I'll take a look from the Azusa down to the 60. I'll include some Rolling Heights, Diamond Bar. It doesn't really matter what I'm doing. I'm just kind of putting some East San Gabriel Valley. All right. We're looking at all the active listings. There's 654 properties. I want to actually narrow this down because I don't want to include everything. Let's go ahead and include only single families active. I only want to discuss properties let's go. I want all properties 700,000 plus. Okay. And I also want to modify this to be, let's just go ahead and take a look at these 685 matches. All right. Now, as you can see in my 685 potential listings, okay, I have a BAC field already indicated in here. I have days on market already indicated on here. So starting with the biggest days on market, this has been on the market for 2-3 years for 13.5 million in Bradbury. They're offering 2%, 2.5, 2.25, 2.5, 2.2. You see all of these fields right here? Okay, great. These are all reasonable commission amounts that I'd be happy to earn and sell. Let's take a look at the landscape of these 700 listings. And I used to have the ability to sort backwards, but let me just go ahead by listing date now. I want to start with who listed recently and what are they doing? Well, these are brand new listings, 0 and 1 day on the market, for example. And they're also indicating 2%, 2.5, 2 blah, 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 blah. Notice right here, there's a 0. I'm going to take a look at this one because I'm interested in checking out Rockfield, Arcadia. And I see they're having open house. And in this instance, BAC says 0, C remarks. Please call agent to inquire about broker compensation. Okay. So I'm going to go ahead and give that. They're asking me to call them. If I'm going to go show this before I spend time and driving out there, I'm going to go call the agent and find out what he means. Okay. So at least he's already kind of telling you he wants you to go give him a call. Okay. That's fine. That's allowed. But notice that if you write an offer, you don't call them, you may not get anything. So you want to clarify. This one right here is giving 1%. Scott Street, Rosemead. Okay. Hey, Scott Street, how you doing? You got 1% for me? Seller will review all offers after 8 days on the market. Scott Property may receive larger number of offers. Therefore, we kindly request you submit highest and best. And they blah, 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 blah. They're only giving out 1%. And so any additional amount, if you're not happy, if you're happy with 9,000, then that's fine with you. But something like this might be complicated. Maybe there is a separate entry or illegal additions. Maybe there's some risks. So I don't know. Every property has a different amount of work and involvement and needs that then you may anticipate. A brand new construction home would be probably very little issues versus something built in 1920s. It's complicated. Your home inspection might need a roofer, a foundation expert, a plumber, electrician, and you might have to come out 7 different times because your buyer wants to conduct a lot of due diligence versus the new home. They might not even perform a home inspection because it comes with a builder warranty for 1 year. So in those 2 instances, should my charges be the exact same amount, whether I have to show up 10 times or I have to show up 0 times? Who's to question the amount of work or involvement? Okay, it's negotiable. per transaction per property, right? So that's another example of differences in compensation I'm seeing starting to take effect. And so out of these listings, again, I'll go back to the one-line display because that's easier for me to show you. And I can see in here 100 per page. I'm starting to see more 1.25% and 1.5%. Okay. So that's just something that I'm seeing going on in some of these changes, like Stevens right here. Okay. So other than that, just go ahead and be prepared to write instructions and to advertise what a BAC field looks like. And I want you to read in here, this is the area seller will consider concessions and offer. This is an area that says will consider. It does not mean it's obligated. It still should be stipulated in your RPA purchase offer. Even though you wrote in here 2%, it needs to be stipulated again in your offer if you want it to be considered. And if you're a buyer agent, yeah, please consider it. So going back to the results, let's go back one page view. And I want to show you a little trick. Let's just say I am very interested in properties that are going to allow me to look at seller concessions. Okay. So let me show you, there should be a way. I need to be able to add a field. And to do so, I clicked on a button right here, and I'm going to go ahead and look at an area called Seller Concessions. So then I can go ahead and seller consider concessions, and I can add this in to the left of this button, and I'll apply that change. Then I want to move this next to the broker agent commission area. And I can say no, no, I can see no. Yes, this listing says yes. Yes, there's seller concessions for Wagner. Okay, let's take a look at Wagner. Seller will consider concessions an offer. Yes. Okay. Later on, you might even see an amount, concessions in price. So I want you, if you're wanting to make this easier and to navigate for yourself, then seller will consider concessions. Let's double tap, add to the right of this, insert a column, and I'm going to search for concessions in price and concession amount. So I added these 3 fields, and later on, you're going to start seeing these areas being filled out. This agent in Cabana has given 2%. Okay. Their concession, they're already disclosing upfront 2% for the buyer to use towards their obligated closing costs. Okay. So that's just a trick, because I know the whole BAC field will be removed. So this whole column where I see BAC is gone. And I just wanted to show you how to add the column seller concessions and price, and yes or no, and the amount. All right. Any questions now? We covered a lot today, but I just wanted to be thorough. Okay. Sounds like that's it for today. No questions?
So far, no.
All right. I hope that explains your concerns It's not going to be that dramatic. Everyone knows some buyer's agents still got to get paid. You just got to spend more time negotiating or picking up and asking, hey, what's your commission offered or not? And you're going to have to, do a little bit more work and education to your clients. Kat asked a great question. There's a seller concession 2% and a BAC 2%. So technically, these are different things. It is amount of 4% total when you add 2 plus 2. The broker area commission is 2%. So let's say I wrote an offer today to that agent and they got acceptance. I would include my CBC form and ask for 2% paid by the listing broker. Yes. Okay, because that's what's advertised in the MLS. Subsequently, a seller concession of 2% is additionally given to the buyer towards the buyer's closing costs. If I wrote the offer today, as long as I stipulated it in my RPA, seller concession 2%. Okay. And if I fail to mention that in my RPA to provide a seller concession of 2% to the buyer, then it's a 2% total, my commission only. The seller concession to the buyer, 2%, is only for the buyer's closing costs. It's not my commission. Seller concession is to the buyer. So they're separate items, but it could obligate the seller to 4% if I stipulated it in both areas, the CBC plus the offer itself. And together 4% seller obligation. And this could put the listing broker in a very bad position if the listing broker did not communicate this is a 4% concession it's on both areas. Okay, that would make the listing broker look very, very bad if this was not explained.
Kevin, talking about the concession, normally like before when we report the listing is sold and they have the item to ask for any concession amount. For my understanding, it is like the house asked 1 million. So after the final price is like 980,000. So we will put the concession amount on that is 20,000.
Yeah, if your original offer was 1 million, they negotiated a request for repairs and a price reduction to 980. That's a 20,000 concession.
Okay. So right now you mentioned about another concession is like the seller offer.
It's an upfront concession, not a mid-escrow concession. Negotiation.
I see. So when we report, so
you're gonna report 980 sold, 20,000 concession negotiated in lieu of repairs.
Oh, okay. Gotcha.
Okay.
Okay, then. Thank you.
Any other questions before we end today? Good stuff. Good questions, guys. So I know there's gonna be many more opportunities for you to learn. I suggest the car legal attorneys, legal life seminars to learn more about these changes. They're continuing at the board level to be sending a bunch of different classes on all the BRBC form. But what I covered with you is sufficient for your understanding. In practice, who knows what brokers are going to do to their tactics and strategies to find and get buyers to sign their forms and or their listing tactics to market their property. It's going to have some changes and you'll start seeing it. Okay.
Thank you.
All right, guys. Thanks for all being here today.